Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Leaders Council event. I am Joshua Jackson. I'm Director of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and today's session is titled Beyond Paper Straws, Exploring Practical Actions to Address the Climate Crisis. Today we're joined by Sophia Chang, founder of With Many Roots, and Ben Tolhurst, who is Director of Business Declares. Sophia herself has a decade of experience working in communications for both the for-profit and non-profit sectors, but she now exclusively works around the climate conversation, running workshops, mentoring and writing on the issues surrounding climate education. Ben currently leads the property and asset management business for JLL, and he's the head of UK managed services. Ben is also the director of Business Declares, a not-for-profit that helps organisations to take positive steps to address their environmental footprint. In November, the UK will be hosting the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, otherwise known as COP26. It will be the first time that countries come together to reaffirm their commitment to lowering carbon emissions since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. The UK is already taking positive steps to reach their targets, and this year we will no doubt be hearing a lot from Alex Sharma, currently the president of COP26, about what steps businesses can do businesses can take to do their parts. Today's session is designed to start that process by giving us a taster of where we are and what steps business leaders can take to embed an ecological culture into their business practices. I'm now going to hand over to Sophia and Ben, and they will lead us on this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. What fabulous intros as well. Thank you, appreciate that. So good afternoon all. We're going to launch a poll just to see where we're at. So we picked a particularly provocative title, Beyond Paper Straws, Exploring Practical Actions to Address the Climate Crisis. So if we can launch the poll, please, Alison, that would be great. It's anonymous, but we're just trying to get a gauge on where different organisations are at. No wrong answers here, but you know, lots of different companies are at different stages, so just give you a couple of seconds to put those in. If you are taking some actions and want to share that in the Q&A at the end, you're very welcome to. I think we should have Amy Hassel here from Beauty Kitchens, so she'll be sharing a couple of steps that Beauty Kitchens are taking as well. So those votes are coming in thick and fast. I'll just leave it for a few more seconds. And we'll end the poll there. 91%, I think that's pretty good enough. So okay, really great stuff. So lots of organizations, or you guys are doing different things, you're stepping up your actions, but the majority of you just slightly are taking small scale steps. So that's a really good gauge, and Ben and I will factor that in as we share our conversation. So I'm going to share my screen now, just this like tricky tech bit. We'll hope it will go smoothly. Hopefully you can all see my screen. Alison is in the chat there. So to help us, we will do Q&A at the end. So there is a Q&A chat function there. Please use that if you want to ask the questions. We've got Alison on support there, but we'll keep an eye on the chat box as well. So yes, Josh has kind of set it up brilliantly. The only piece that I would add to the bio is, you know, part of what led that transformation to turn towards the climate crisis was a bit of a personal existential moment as well, when I finally went from knowing climate change to feeling climate change, and now using all that experience to turn towards the climate crisis in full force. I think Ben has an existential crisis to share as well, don't you, Ben?
Yes, thanks, Sophia. Good morning, everybody, and great to be here. Thank you for the invite. So yeah, I've spent my whole life in outsourcing. I've worked in a whole load of organisations and a whole load of markets, from government to telco. And as Joshua said, I currently work for JLL, one of the world's biggest corporate real estate companies. Interestingly, I've absolutely no background whatsoever in sustainability, but I came to this. I'm kind of a year behind you by the looks of it, Sophia, in February 2019, and my climate epiphany really covered, well, really resulted in actions that changed both my personal and professional life. So from a personal perspective, within 9 months of that February epiphany, I did a whole load of things. For example, I adopted a vegan diet. I looked at any savings, any pension I might have, and worked to decarbonize them. I stopped flying. I stopped buying needless things, which I realized I didn't really need. From a professional life perspective, within that time, I also adopted a role of an agitator, I guess. I presented to the UK board a pack on climate science. I developed a training pack, which I delivered to several hundred staff and clients. And I think most importantly, I took the role of a role model for legitimizing the conversation. And having a conversation around climate and ecological breakdown is a sort of awkward thing to do in the workplace, and it's not the norm. And I worked to encourage people to have that discussion. I also joined Business Declares, which I'll talk about a bit later. And I suppose the ultimate act of employee activism, I recruited my successor and I quit my job. So from the 1st of May this year, I will dedicate all of my time to raising awareness about the climate and ecological breakdown amongst citizens, amongst employees, amongst businesses, and most importantly, as well as raising awareness, to actually support those people and organisations to tackle this and take action. So that's it from me by way of introduction. If we just move on.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, definitely have
just
that.
Move on to the next one.
Oh, sorry, Ben.
Yeah, sorry, I lost the signal. Yeah, it's fine now. Thank you.
All right, no worries. Yes, lots of changes in my life as well, trying all sorts, including stand-up comedy, which was one of the scariest things that I've ever done, but now landed on doing workshops to make the science more accessible and to encourage us talking about it more. So we're going to reflect, just zoom out a little bit on the scale of the problem. You know, on the one hand, our focus here today is focus on the climate crisis. We are now at 1.1 degree warmer average than pre-industrial levels. We are on target to roughly hit the 2 degrees threshold by around 2045, according to Carbon Brief in December 2020. So that's like a huge issue that we need to tackle. But layered on top of that is the ecological crisis, so our kind of habitat destruction and our land use, and kind of pollution and plastic and things like that. But you could also argue that we're seeing kind of political instability, both kind of further afield, and divisiveness closer to home, perhaps. We've got gross inequality, creeping inequality that is causing kind of economic issues, and lots of a bubbling up of many social issues, including kind of the racism debate, class, gender, and that kind of thing. And not to mention that we're also living under the umbrella of a pandemic for the last 12 months. What's really important to say is like the warning signs are out there, and they're coming from all different parts, all different facets of society. So we've got sort of Mark Carney, the former Governor Bank of England, raising the alarm. We've got public health doctors, nurses, also coming forward and saying we need to address this, and not just for places far away, but actually right here at home, that we're going to be affected and impacted by this. We've got the IPCC, so that's the UN body of scientists, saying we need to really think about where our food is coming from in the next little while. The Dasgupta report was highlighting how crucial our relationship is with nature and what is the value of it. And of course, although 2019 was a very vocal year for climate activists, despite COVID, there is still this rising awareness and knowledge that we need to take this seriously by the public as well. And the thing to really just point out is we are not on track. So the UN report that looked at the difference between a 1.5 degree world and a 2 degree world that came out at the end of 2018, which was cued my existential crisis, really highlighted that 1.5 was really worth aiming for. But crucially, we are not on track for that. So this is December 2020 data. Our pledges and current policies take us to a 3-degree mark by the end of this century. What's intriguing and irritating at the same time is in that report, it said, we have all the technology that we need. What we lack is political will. What we lack is political will. So this is within our grasp, this is doable. And so I guess what we're kind of dilating and going to go into is like, what is the precursor to shift that political will? So the scale of the problem is huge, but I also really want to acknowledge that the scale of the solution is equally kind of as mind-bogglingly complex at the same time. So that 2018 UN report also called for rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. So that's just take a moment here. That is absolutely huge. You know, on the one hand, you know, Ben's had his existential crisis. It demands a recalibration of all the things that we grew up thinking that were status symbols and symbols of success. You know, I grew up thinking, you know, I needed the job, I needed the nice car, and I needed my 2 trips to Thailand, for example, because that's what I deserved. And now this is calling for a recalibration of what success looks like. And that's just at the personal level, but we need to be doing that at the community level, corporate level, and kind of society at large. And I think it's quite telling that the steps that we've seen from larger entities, individuals and maybe corporates is not at the scale, at the systemic level that to match the problem. So there is no denying that this is a hugely difficult task. So that's me laying the scene. I have my prop here. This is like the stick part of it. There are many threats that we face and threats from inaction, but there are rewards when we take action. So I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's going to move over to the carrot half. What are the opportunities and rewards when we do take action? Over to you, Ben.
Okay, thanks, Sophia. Yes. So you've heard about the scale of the problem. The challenge is huge, and I guess it's really a natural reaction to feel powerless and overwhelmed. But what I would just invite people to remember is that as human beings, we are capable of huge change. We're capable of huge adaptation. We're capable of moving impossible to possible, and particularly where there is political will, which is a really important point that Sophia just raised. Just remember how the country was rebuilt after the Second World War. Just reflect on how firms retooled their manufacturing during COVID. So there is the ability to address all of these things. There is the ingenuity. And what I would like to touch on now is just 5 areas and come to some really gritty, practical specifics of how businesses can start to do that. So if we could move on to the first one, which is people. So I think the fundamental point I'd like to make here is that if a business wants to have any chance in competing in the war for talent, it must adopt a credible stance on the climate crisis. As new talent enters the workforce, and I'm really, I guess, particularly thinking of Generation Zs, these bunch of individuals are having a huge focus on purpose-led organizations, and that's the sort of businesses that they want to work for. And whichever survey you care to look at, and there's a couple on the slide there, survey after survey is telling us this. So what things can organizations do that might attract staff and compete in this war for talent? Well, firstly, having a genuine and authentic purpose-driven ethos is massively important. So, you know, let's put that as a fundamental. But when it comes to the actual specifics, what are some of the examples that we're seeing out there that organizations do? So let me just quote a couple of these. So one organization that I spoke to recently is offering £200 per staff member or a day off, whichever, for everybody that adopts a green tariff, for example. In JLL, the company I work for, we have something called the Big Green Switch. And the Big Green Switch is a business-driven campaign, I guess, to encourage individuals, and JLL employs 8,000 in the UK, to encourage those individuals to switch to a green tariff in their own domestic use. And we also need to remember that the lines between domestic use of electricity and work use are now hugely blurred with the COVID crisis and, you know, more working from home. Other examples, banning flights. There are organisations that are doing that, specifically internal flights, for example. Just picking again JLL, where I work, if you can get there in 4.5 hours on the train, then you don't fly. And that basically is London to Scotland, London to Amsterdam, London to Paris, etc. All of those journeys now have to be made by the train, not flights. There are other organisations who totally accept that if people are going to, say, go on holiday and use the train rather than the plane, it will take more time. So they're offering extra time off to look after that. And there are some others who are deliberately taxing themselves per tonne of CO2 used, and using that money to spend perhaps on rewilding, perhaps on offsetting, or perhaps on other schemes. And the benefit of doing all of these things in the workplace, of course, is that firstly, it will attract those purpose-driven new talent into the workforce, but it will also have a reinforcing loop of ensuring people understand these things and perhaps take them up at home as well. So people is a key one. It's a key advantage and benefit that the businesses can draw from the climate emergency. If I move on to the second one, which is products, there's nothing like driving innovation in a crisis. So products which are seen as ethical, products which support the climate emergency are very much on the rise. I think it was last year, 1 in 4 food products, new food products that were launched were labelled vegan, from the Greggs sausage roll to the Beyond Burgers, the Impossible Burgers, etc. Tesla is clearly the iconic green car that combines both design and everything else with environmental design. There's examples on here from Unilever and a whole range of other organisations. Unilever running a lot of B corporations. And then there's individual products. So the EcoVen machines, for example, if you see one of those, you put your plastic bottle in, it gets crushed, recycled. At the back end, you get a voucher to spend in the shopping centre or wherever the machine happens to be. The whole thing's powered through solar. So we're seeing loads and loads of innovative new approaches, new products, which is good for the economy and the company, but also in keeping with the climate challenge. Just moving on to the next one. So as well as products, we've got bottom line. So the bottom line growth can be hugely improved by a number of different things that might involve things like switching energy, switching to renewables, designing out waste. I mean, there's a lot of drive to zero landfill productions, and those actually have a financial return to businesses as well as obviously the environment. And there are some examples that I put on the slide here, which I won't read through obviously, but we've got examples from really big organisations, and they have literally saved hundreds of millions through rethinking their energy use and their supply chain. And again, the knock-on effect of that is that it gets employees to question what they're doing in their house and actually create that virtuous circle, which I talked about earlier. The next one I want to touch on is resilience. So resilience is maybe not the most sexy of topics, but actually it's absolutely massively important. And by focusing on the climate and ecological breakdown, organisations can develop greater resilience in their businesses. So if you understand how resilient your business is with particular respect to the climate crisis, you will have a better grasp of things like the value of your assets. You'll have a better grasp of things like pricing volatility. You'll have a better grasp of things like the supply chain stability. And having a better awareness of these aspects gives you a whole new viewpoint on securing resilience in your own organisation. There are loads of ways or measurement tools out there at the moment, but probably the most well-known would be the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is a hell of a phrase. So it's shortened to TCFD, and this was created in 2015 by the Financial Stability Board, and it was put in place to develop a consistent climate-related financial risk disclosure that companies, banks, investors can adopt to provide to their different stakeholders. If it's voluntary right now, something like this, or indeed this, will become mandatory in time. So it is work for organisations, but it's actually very beneficial work. And as I say, investors will look to, will request these reports, and if you're looking for money, you'll need to provide them. And then, talking of looking for money, the final one that I just wanted to talk about is investments. So if you are looking to raise money, attract investors, be they public, be they institutional, having a green focus will be far more advantageous than not. So whether it's the Financial Times, Goldman Sachs, Bloomberg, or any other analysts, the opinion and the evidence is all heading one way, that impact investing in low carbon intensity organizations will continue to lead the way on financial performance. So I guess in summary, despite the seemingly insurmountable challenges that we have ahead of us, there do exist today the ingenuity to solve some of these things, and at the real business level, there is plenty of opportunity and ways in which those challenges can be addressed. So I will pause on that bit of the presentation and just move on to a slight segue. So the steps that an organisation can take. I've talked about some real specific ones in that last piece of presentation, but what I'd like to do now is focus on two very specific themes. The first one, I will talk about business declares and what we do, and the second one, I will hand back to Sophia to pick up the reins. So if we could move to the business declares part. I talked about my climate epiphany, and I talked about my need to devote my time to addressing this issue. And what I did in 2019 was I looked for an organisation that I could join and volunteer some time that was in keeping with my own personal mission, and was something I could add some value to. And I came to Business Declares, and I joined the board and became director a bit later from there on in. But Business Declares is a not-for-profit business. We comprise individuals from a whole range of sectors, backgrounds, industries, big and small, people, experience, and younger volunteers. And I suppose one of the core facets of Business Declares is that we recognise that business has a major part to play in tackling the climate and ecological breakdown that we're in the midst of. So our raison d'etre, if you like, is to raise awareness of this agenda right across the business sector, and most importantly, accelerate action in tackling this issue. So how do we do that? We do that in three main ways, I guess, as a convener of dialogues, working with other networks, organisations, as we are doing today, if you like. Secondly, by acting as an agitator or critical business friend. So we might work with organisations to explore very edgy and difficult topics, such as how do you put planet ahead of profit, and what does that mean for your business strategy? How do you deal with your scope 3 in your supply chain, and people who are for whom you are in their scope 3 and their supply chain? And the final thing is the sharing of good practice and thought leadership. You could be pretty much assured that any climate related challenge issue that you've got in your business, somebody else has also got in theirs. And maybe some of those organizations have some really innovative and thoughtful ways through that. So that good practice sharing across our network is proving invaluable. Just in terms of some of the events we've run recently, last month we ran an event on why businesses should support the CEE bill. We had some notable business leaders at that event, and we also had Caroline Lucas MP giving a preface to it. Last week we ran an a webinar for smaller organisations on how they can practically measure their carbon footprint and reduce the impacts of their footprints. And we've also run sector-specific webinars. So with Architects Declared, for example, we ran a whole session on how to improve the value chain in the built environment such that it becomes more carbon friendly. So we can work with any groups, any organizations to actually do that. As long as the raison d'etre is this mission, this purpose, then we're up for supporting. And I suppose ultimately we want to create the conditions through which it becomes mainstream, that businesses really grasp the urgency and the impact of the crisis that we're in, and ultimately, of course, act by adopting new ways of working, new business models, and governed by transparent plans. There's no charge for joining Business Declares. We do seek donations for things like running the website. So if you believe this could benefit you, then we can talk after. So yeah, just coming to this, the next couple of slides. To become a member, we have some kinds of rules or requirements, but ultimately they boil down to this, that we ask people to make a public declaration to actually show they are genuinely declaring emergency and up for acting on it. We ask organisations to think about what their plan might be with regard to net zero, covering scopes 1 and 2, of course, but also talking and thinking about what they do about scope 3. We work with organisations to help produce a climate transition plan or a summary plan. And of course, we ask organisations to advocate for this agenda and to advocate for change. So that's the sort of rules of engagement, if you like. If I just move on now very briefly, we have around 40 members, and you can see from the slide here just a selection of a few. So real cross-sector businesses, from Ecotricity and Good Energy in the energy side, through to Bates Wells in the legal side, through to The Body Shop, Pucker, People Tree in the retail side, Whole Grain Digital in the tech side, a real cross-sector range of organisations. And when we come together, there is so much learning, so much sharing that goes on, and it's found to be really valuable from the standpoint of those particular organisations. If I just move on to give you an illustrative example of the one-pager climate action plan. This is obviously a summary taken from a wider document, but this is the kind of thing we would work on. And here's an example from Pucker Herbs. What's the commitment that's being made? What are the actions that the organisation will take? And what's the overall response to the breakdown? This is the type of plan, and behind that would sit obviously much more detail as to how that organisation would go about it, and that's what we would share plans from other organisations and work with you on. And finally, just moving on to the next slide. This is it from me. So thank you very much for listening. Very keen to take any questions that we'll come on to later. If you need to contact me or you'd like to contact me, there are my details, and it'd be really great to open it up to discussion later on and maybe connect with some of you after today. So that's it from me. Thank you. Back to Sophia.
Thank you, Ben. I've been to some of Business Declare's events and learned a lot at each one of them that I've been to. So I'm here to talk about the second very practical action that you might want to consider in your organisation, and that is raising climate literacy. Do we understand it? So I kind of scoped out the complexity of the problem, but it's worth spending a bit more time in it when we're frustrated with the lack of inaction. Maybe we need to go right back to the beginning and consider, do we as individuals, as leaders, and do our people understand it? Have we given our people, our staff, opportunity to kind of process this information? We won't go into it in too much detail as well, but I very strongly advocate for connecting what we learn to how we feel, and given the scale of change that we need to see, a marriage of heart and head can produce perhaps longer lasting behaviour change and therefore systems change. But let's stay cerebral for today. Do we understand it? We're talking about really complex science here. The national curriculum barely mentions the climate crisis. I do these workshops with people still in school. They don't cover it much. And for those of us who've been out of school for a while, we really need to seek this information out. And when it's out there, as we'll see, kind of got another visual that describes it, is we're not getting the whole picture necessarily. We need to encourage systems thinking, which is quite a new way of thinking for many of us. So we need to see the whole picture. We need to be changing our perspective to see new leverage points in complex systems, and really kind of identifying the interdependencies. Systems thinking also encourages us to pay attention and give voice to the long term, and find where unintended and unanticipated consequences might emerge. So this lack of knowledge is all the way through, not just through education, but even at board level. So there was a study that came out last month that looked at over 1,000 board members from 100 of the US's largest companies. Only 3 members of those 1,100 people had any level of climate expertise. One example was a property and casualty insurance company that had no environmental expertise on the board in a year that they experienced $100 billion in damage caused by climate change, which heightened extreme weather events. So, you know, from school and our kids all the way through our think about our employees, but even at board level, we are lacking that information. A Deloitte study in 2019 looking at the insurance sector said 1/3 of responding regulators said they didn't know how well insurers were prepared to deal with the potential impacts of climate-related risks. Anecdotally, I've been talking to a lot more of kind of external sustainability consultants, but also kind of internal CSR leaders who are like knocking their head against a brick wall when they're trying to encourage and push their clients or their employers for systems change, and they're coming at it with, why don't we switch to paper straws? So, you know, we're not, that lack of understanding is really limiting our ability. So while this understanding, this deeper understanding of the complex climate science and systems change stays within academia or CSR, we are really limiting the creative solutions and leaving the burden of those solutions on very few shoulders. Essentially, like, maybe not enough of us have the full brief. If you were going to do any kind of good project management, you start with knowing the brief. When you're problem solving, you need to understand the problem. So I would like to encourage us to consider that maybe not enough of us have connected emotionally and intellectually to the brief at hand. So what if not only your CSR manager and direct reports understood the complexity? What if the facilities team, procurement, legal, catering were all able to join the dots, and then they could pull on their deep departmental experience and contribute solutions together? Can you empower your people to collectively solve the problem? What if when you're getting through and rolling out those changes, and I know some of you from that poll are already making those steps, what if you bring your people with you? One of the key principles of change management is to engage, and to be sharing your rationale. So raising climate literacy in your organization is a very practical step that you can take that can pave the way not only for the successful delivery of your ESG programs, but also create a culture shift that will spill over beyond the employee's work. So I just want to use that to introduce one of these workshops that I absolutely love to give. So last year when I was experimenting how to be useful, I was giving presentations on the science, but it had this, a bit like this workshop webinar today, this sort of this distance between us and you guys participating. And I like shrinking that gap and taking small groups of people at a time through what's called the climate collage, where we break down the complexity of the science. So it takes one of the big last UN science reports, the 5th cycle assessment of the IPCC from 2014, and it turns it into picture format. So you can see some of these pictures here. I've got the real thing right in front of me as well, but we're looking at issues like temperature change, CO2 emissions, additional greenhouse effects, fossil fuels, sea level rise. And what we do as a group is we establish the relationship between these cards. So what is the cause and effect? Right, and then over time we build in complexity. So I know that you've been listening. I can see some comments coming in the chat, but I'd really love us to get a bit more interactive now. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully you can see where I've moved it to. We're going to have a little demo of this game. So we've got these cards here that I shared before. what we need to do when we start playing this game, and it's not quite the same because I like to do it in small intimate spaces, but I wanted to give you a bit of a taste, is what is the cause and effect? What is the order of these cards? So I've got Alison in the ready to help us on the tech, but I'd love to hear in the chat, and she will share it as well, what comes next, right? So if the first card is human activities, with what's in front of us, what comes next? What do human activities do, for example? This is an experiment, so I'm hoping you'll come forward. Okay, thank you, Kirsten. I can see that we've got CO2 emissions. Really good suggestion, but Karen, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's fossil fuels. Thank you, Karen. So we can just zoom in here a little bit. So obviously we're talking here about the emissions of fossil fuels. That's actually very small, so you might not have been able to see that before. My apologies. So fossil fuel emissions has risen hugely since 1950s onwards, but obviously the Industrial Revolution started here. And then Kirsten, you're absolutely right. CO2 emissions then comes after that. So what is in fossil fuels? One of the main components is CO2. Any hazard a guess at what comes next? So we've got a few options here. What do you think? I can now see the chat, Alison, so I can see people's suggestions coming in. Karen's coming in with additional greenhouse effect, and so's Farida. Thank you for getting involved. I appreciate this. You first two in are absolutely right. Additional greenhouse effect. So CO2 is a greenhouse effect. It's very natural. Without the greenhouse effect, the world would be considerably colder than it would be today. And life on Earth would be very different. So greenhouse effect, very natural. It's like a nice blanket keeping us warm. But crucially, the word additional is in front here. And we are talking about the additional effect because of what humans are doing primarily, and that we're talking about here is burning of fossil fuels. So it's like putting an extra blanket around us now that wasn't there before. And now I can see people coming in with the next suggestion. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Alison. Absolutely right. That is leading to an increase in temperature rise. Now you might remember me saying we're now at 1.1 degree warmer than above pre-industrial levels, and these red and blue lines are different projections that the IPCC is following. So I can see Keith is suggesting melting of sea ice comes next. Absolutely right. So I'm just zooming out because we've got our story coming together here. And what normally happens in our group is people put sea rise coming next. So that's a little bit of a trick that we're putting in here, because actually it does not lead to temperature rise. So the melting of sea ice does not lead to sea level rise. So that is because if any of you have a glass of water with an ice cube in, and if you watch it melt, the level of the water would stay the same. So this is Archimedes' principle and just a little bit of physics that we're throwing in there. So the density of the ice cube, the amount of water that the ice cube displaces is equal to the volume of the water when it melts. So it's an Archimedes principle physics thing. Other types of ice melt does lead to sea level rise. And if we play the game in full, you'll find out why and what those are. But what we're introducing here is this notion of this non-linear change. And so the notion that this isn't a simple narrative. It's not one thing, then one thing, then one thing. It's one thing, then many things, then a few things, and a lot more things. So that is round one of the climate collage. Thank you so much. I was really nervous at how that would go. I'm just going to go back to our screen. So I'll give you a little, you should all give yourselves a pat on the back, particularly if you got involved or were guessing or gesticulating at the screen. So a little spoiler alert here. This is what we build up, and it really gives a framework. And I'd love to invite Ben in again here because he played it with me, I think back in June last year with the Business Declares team. We really map out all the different drivers, mechanisms, and consequences. Ben, what stayed with you after all this time?
Yeah, I think, it's hard to come across in this kind of webinar, but what came across with the group, and there was maybe 6 or 7 of us, was the collaborative discussion and the nature, and we'd be arguing, no, it should be that, no, it should be that, why was that, because of that, and it actually gets teams speaking, collaborating, engaging, and getting passionate about what they're talking about, and that's just invaluable from an education perspective. So the collaboration was key for me. I also learned a lot. I thought I knew stuff, and it turns out, well, I actually didn't. So that was a good eye opener. And I think the hearts and minds as a precursor to taking action. People generally are less likely to take action unless they really understand why they're doing it and for what benefit. And what this did was to make people think, oh my goodness, I really do need to stop burning fossil fuels, because look at the non-linear interdependencies of all of that. So there was a hearts and minds piece to it as well.
Thank you, Ben. And since we did it with Business Declares back in June, it's really growing fast. So 100,000 people around the world have played this. But what's relevant for our particular group is that companies are getting involved as well. So for example, EDF is rolling it out to all their staff. Coca-Cola in the UK are starting to dabble in it. Google France and Deloitte France are well immersed in it, and they're now bringing it over into the UK. BNP Paribas, for example, the banking organization, is taking it into the US. But even for smaller organizations, it can work in different ways. So I've worked with a small tech company in California, and the green team used it as part of as a tool to revamp their green strategy post-COVID, because they kind of had to rip their original one out and start again. So we really kind of set the scene, if you see what I mean, give the whole brief, and then think of how they could have more impact then. Also yesterday did the workshop with Bristol Cable, so it's a local journalist organization, so it's really relevant for communicators, storytellers, writers, journalists, marketing professionals, because if they can join the dots, they can help your readers and customers join the dots as well. I'm doing it for a small startup in a few weeks' time, and he really wants to kind of set that culture of team building during times of COVID with purpose. So lots going on there, and I just wanted to sow that seed. So we are going to move into the Q&A now, and I'm going to stop sharing so we can see our faces. We've also, Alison, do we have any questions coming in so far?
So we had an excellent question about a method of calculating the carbon footprint for a business.
Ben, would you like to take that question?
Yes, I put a brief answer in the chat, and I'll be very happy to follow up separately with anyone that's interested. That there are a load of tools out there. Some of them are really quite straightforward and simple to use. So the World Wildlife Fund would be the one, and that might be, I don't know, 15 questions, something like that, that ask about the size of your house and what sort of food you eat and your flying frequency and all of that stuff. And that's quite good just to sort of dabble. Then you've got something like GICO, G-I-K-O, which does it in a slightly different way. And what I like about that one is it gives you recommendations of what to do differently. And that's a bit more involved, and it gives you kind of badges of way of doing things well. And then for businesses, something like the Whole Grain Digital Toolkit or the Compare Your Footprint Toolkit is more in depth. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and you'll put in things like your energy usage, for example. So there's a whole range. It depends what purpose you want it for. If it's just to have a go and have a dabble and get started, go for the straightforward one. If you've done that and you're frustrated that it's not sophisticated enough, go for one of the others. But if anyone is interested, I can put you in touch with all of those organizations and get people started on those afterwards if you message me or however you want to get in touch with me.
Okay, brilliant. I think we've got Amy here, who's a member of the Leaders Council and B Corp, and she should be able to speak. Yay, the gift of speech. Amy, do you want to share for a minute or two what you guys what steps you've been taking?
Yeah, of course. Can you see and hear me first of all?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, so thanks Ben and Sophia for talking. It's really great to hear about people who are really passionate about the same thing. And you're right, it is definitely about an educational piece with climate change. One of our favourite quotes from Anne-Marie Bonneau, I think that's how you say her name, and she's a zero waste chef. says that we don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly. So it's definitely about educating people to have that desire to change. And from a business point of view, at Beauty Kitchen, we kind of see the desire that consumers have to change and want sustainable options. However, as a business, we have a responsibility to be able to provide those sustainable options and make them accessible. So I work for Beauty Kitchen, and we make sustainable cosmetics products from the inside out. So whether that's microplastic free ingredients within reusable packaging, and we're pioneering the return, refill, repeat program, where we're being transparent with businesses and offering sustainable packaging solutions. So Ben, you touched on Unilever's sustainability points there, and they recently came to us to work on a refill station project. So we actually launched our first 3 refill stations with them and their products within Asda's sustainability store in Middleton, which is very exciting to hear how the larger corporations are coming to, we're an SME, but we have the solutions and clearly they're scalable. And we're just kind of proof that these are good business options. But one thing that we wanted to mention was that we're also a B Corp, and obviously B Corp came up, Ben, you mentioned them, and there's 400 in the UK now, but we became the first UK high street beauty B Corp in the UK back in 2016, I believe. And for us, it's more of a public declaration that we're serious about creating change and, of course, maintaining that change. Becoming B Corp certified, you're legally obliged to keep up this ethos, and we're actually going through a recertification at the moment, but it's more of a certification for us. It's kind of pushing out a belief and to our consumers that we're serious about creating change. So I would definitely encourage people to kind of research this for their business as another option to look into that. It's a long process because it's not easy to become a B Corp. Not everyone becomes a B Corp because you're very meticulously looked at from the inside out of a business, from your supply chain, as you'll know. But I definitely would encourage that there's a lot of elements outside of being a B Corp that you need to commit to with sustainability, but that's definitely something to look into.
Thank you, Amy, for sharing that hands-on kind of real life actions that you're taking, because I think that's part of it is sharing these stories and normalizing it. I mean, are there any kind of challenges that you might or be willing to share that you've had to overcome? Because I think that's part of it as well, right? It's not all plain sailing. It can be difficult. Is there anything you want to share in your experience?
I think in terms of challenges, it's opening people's eyes to sustainability and that it is an issue that needs to be solved, specifically with businesses, because we have the power to kind of create change and consumer perceptions. But for us, it's all about being transparent, which is why we are so willing to work with other businesses to kind of start from the inside. So definitely transparency and education is key, because sustainability is a complex issue and it's not going to be solved with competitiveness at all. So it's definitely about being transparent as a business.
Thank you, Amy. Ben, did you want to chime in? Any things that bounced off what Amy was saying?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is to get people to, I think your phrase was join the dots, and actually understand that the hurricane in Mozambique, the freezing of Chicago, the recent stuff in Texas, the removal of an entire UK village in Fishbourne, North Wales, because it's going to fall into the sea, etc., etc. All of those things are not just the run-of-the-mill normal rhythm of the pattern of the environment. They are directly caused by the things that we are doing. And I just feel that people don't join those dots. And if they did, if we could get them to join those dots better, then the piece that's the difficult one, galvanizing action, would be accelerated really quickly. And the problem, of course, in joining the dots is no one wants to hear negative stuff all the time. So how do you join up all these negative things to then create positive action? And that's a challenge that's kind of running through my mind at the minute.
Thank you, Ben. Alison, do we have any more questions?
Yes, we have a question about what would be the first thing you would recommend to help business leaders take their first steps towards a more sustainable business? And this is from Joshua.
Maybe you could do Ben and then Amy. Maybe if you can remember your first step, that would be great.
Yeah, so the steps to get business leaders to take action. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but it does go back to raising awareness and education. Why is this stuff important, and why should I do it, and what's in it for me? Or more importantly, what's in it for my children? Answer, they will have a longer and prosperous life. So I think it's getting that awareness, getting that education, joining those dots, but doing it in a corporate setting so that it's consumable within the corporate culture that you're in. And depending on what culture that is, there will be different ways of having those conversations and presenting that material. And that's something that takes a bit of judgment, to be honest. But it comes back to me, raising awareness, education, and joining the dots.
And Amy, what were your first steps when you were just starting out at Beauty Kitchens?
Yeah, I definitely agree, and it's really important to look at it from an internal perspective as well. If you're, and this is where greenwashing comes to play, that you need to be genuinely interested in these issues from an internal perspective to be able to push that message out as well. I mean, our kind of stance is that we're trying to take the take, make, waste way of working, which is linear within the cosmetics industry and every industry, to be honest, and turning that into a reuse model. And it's really important that we understand that internally to be able to kind of educate other businesses and consumers on that. So yeah, I agree.
Brilliant, thank you. I think trying to appeal to people's feelings on even just at the individual level, and having something that sticks that is relevant to who the leader that you're speaking to. So like really taking all my comms, like tailoring the message for the person it needs to land with would be my suggestion.
Definitely. Sorry, Sophia, just to pitch in really quickly. I think that it's often seen as a scaremongering piece sometimes, whereas we need to make the educational pieces seem like simple swaps within sustainability. For on a consumer level, for example, it's important to make the end goal seem really accessible, which, you know, we can do that.
In this last bit, I think we've had some more questions come in. Alison, what's the next question we should take?
We've had some excellent questions coming in the last couple minutes. Probably one that kind of covers the overarching theme that I'm seeing is, do we have any resources on awareness to raise awareness within organizations on these big issues?
I can just quickly chime in. I know that, well, through the B Lab and the B Corp resources, they have introductory resources. Ben, you use something at JLL, right?
Yeah, so just on the B Corp, and sorry, Amy, you might have been going to say this, there's something called the Playbook, which is a phenomenal guide to what organizations can do. I think it's free online, and it's great, and it's something that I read some time back. So well done to the B Corps for what they've done there. Business Declares also has a load of information packs. We can run workshops. I think hitting people with a load of slides is not the answer. I think it's got to be done within some kind of meeting, but in short order, there are videos, there are recorded webinars, and there are information packs, www.businessdeclares.com, that people can take off there. But I would encourage more actually Zoom to Zoom, face-to-face meetings with those packs rather than just sending them around.
Alison, have we had any more questions come in?
Yes, this is a question for Ben. So raising educational awareness, will this not continue to be a challenge for teachers until we reflect the complexity of climate change in a curriculum that better reflects an interdisciplinary approach to teaching and learning?
Yes, so it was a long question. I was trying to assimilate all of that. Can't actually see it down there. I think at the end of the day, when you look at this in the round, there is very little time left. And whilst one has to be sensitive to feelings, and if this is a school question, then this material has to be tailored to the age group, clearly. But if it's an older age group or it's adults, we can't be doing the soft soaping. We've got to tell the truth. And even if people don't like negativity and don't like the truth, unfortunately, as adults, my personal view is we have to lean into it. We have to understand it. We have to take the time to do it. And then we need to pull ourselves back out of that, pit of despair, which people might find themselves in, into actual positive actions. I don't know if this answers the question, but I think the general concept is get the truth out there, get it told, get it learned, and then come in very quickly with specific actions to take, because the science is unquestionable. It's very clear where we are heading, and it's also quite clear some of the things that we need to do to address it. So truth plus actions, I guess, would be the summary of that.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got Joshua's turned his camera on, so I think that's our cue to start wrapping up. Do we have time for one more question, Josh, or?
Yeah, time for another. Go for it.
Is there one more burning question, Alison, that you want to pick?
Yes, Sally has asked, do we see much intersectionality with businesses and consumers being interested in climate change, but also other issues such as socially responsible supply chains, animal testing, and does that present challenges? I think, Sophia, maybe?
Yeah, there's a great quote from a feminist writer that's, we're not single issue people. I think so. I'm going to butcher that quote. If anyone can remember it better than me. So, for me, I have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder that the environment movement and other factors, have forced it over onto its side on its own in its own little ring. And, it's got a sort of assigned sort of a political left, for example. This is like an all people issue. This is an all hands on deck issue. If you like to eat, if you like to move, if you like to work, it's an issue that's relevant to all of us. And I think the intersectionality discussion is really interesting. The latest playbook from B Corp actually is this social justice playbook and how businesses can start bringing that into the discussion. So we'll share that link with Joshua so we can pass it on to you as well. But we're running out of time. So those other questions, we'll make a note and we can feed them back through Joshua so you can get answers to those. Just want to, I think Josh is going to do thank you. So I just want to do one thank you for Amy. Awesome stuff for stepping in. Lovely to hear from you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you everybody for joining and taking part in the session. That was really interesting. Sophia, Ben, again, great for leading on that. It'll be really interesting to see sort of next developments, and if anybody would like to get in touch, either go through me or I'll be sending over the video recording and the details for both Sophia and Ben moving forwards as well. So hopefully we can start having this conversation a little bit more broadly. And Amy, well done, thanks for chiming in. Very much last minute, but really interesting to hear what you guys are doing at Beauty Kitchens, and obviously a bit more about the B Corp there as well. But as I say, I'll send over anything for you after this for everybody that's attended, and if there's anything at the Leaders Council that we can be doing, please do get in contact. But thank you all, and have a good day. Goodbye.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye. Thank you.